If we have trust between people, then we can have clearer communication, a much better understanding, and therefore if we have a level of trust that's unconscious, which trust is based on an unconscious reality over time, but if we have the tools to be able to accelerate that process to build trust and rapport, then we can really start to gain traction with our goals and objectives.
This podcast is sponsored by Pragmatic Solutions, the player account management platform chosen by today's smart betting and gaming operators. Don't let technical constraints delay you from achieving your business goals. Expand your business, boost your margins, and dominate the market in any leading regulated jurisdiction with our powerful, flexible, and secure iGaming platform. Enjoy its extensive marketing tools, compliance protection, real-time data, and a wide portfolio of over 1,000 industry providers. It's time to upgrade your technology. Let Pragmatic Solutions show you the modern approach. Visit pragmatic.solutions and join the smart thinkers.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Play, a leading game developer providing player favorites to the most successful brands across the industry. With an award-winning multi-product portfolio of slots, live casino, bingo, virtual sports, and more, Pragmatic Play is powering up new possibilities of play through one single API. Visit pragmaticplay.com and discover your favorite every time.
Kelly McSherry, I am super intrigued to have just you coming to our show, which is not only one show. It's going to be 6 episodes, short snippets, digging into your brain about NLP, which is Neuro-Linguistic Programming.
That's right.
And throughout this series, you will help us to learn and understand very quick techniques in leading others, leading your own life, or who actually gains from NLP and its approach to communication.
Everybody, and the person that wants to learn and understand better about themselves, and really importantly, those people in leadership positions, how it is that they can apply these techniques to get the very best from themselves, and really importantly, all those people they're responsible for.
Fantastic. And UK?
Me, well, as you rightly said, Heidi, I'm Kelly McSherry. My background is I had a long business career, and then I retrained as a psychotherapist. I'm an NLP trainer, and I'm also an accredited coach, and I do a lot of executive coaching globally. So that's who I am.
Awesome. And today we're going to start dissecting. Is that a good word?
Exploring.
Rapport.
We are.
Let's explore rapport. What is rapport to you?
Well, rapport to me is that unconscious communication between two people that helps to build trust. And if you think about it in the context of what we're discussing primarily around leadership, trust is the foundation of success. If we have trust between people, then we can have clearer communication, a much better understanding, and therefore if we have a level of trust that's unconscious, which trust is based on an unconscious reality over time, but if we have the tools to be able to accelerate that process to build trust and rapport, then we can really start to gain traction with our goals and objectives, which we'll come on to in a later edition. So there's some really easy tools and techniques, and I've got a little list in front of me. And what I'm going to do is take you through them one by one. And anytime you've got questions, Heidi, do jump in.
Before you start, what I remember from my quick NLP practitioner courses is the understanding of someone is like me, hence I like him or her. So we have something in common, and it feels familiar. So I could easily understand your reality. Hence, we like each other because we are alike. So is that basically what we're talking about when we talk about rapport? Understanding each other.
That's a great way of describing it. If you think about sitting in a restaurant or in a pub or a bar, and you're sitting there and you happen to notice people sitting across the other side of the bar, and they just seem to mirror everything. They're leaning into each other and they lean back, they take a drink at the same time. That's because they have a depth of relationship. Now, the joy of NLP is that we can learn how it is with somebody that we don't know or we're not that similar to take your point. So we can learn how it is that we can step inside their world unconsciously, so not knowing, in order to start to build that level of rapport and trust with them really effectively and really genuinely as well. This has to come from a place of authenticity in order to be able to really build that connection. And there's ways we can do it through verbal and non-verbal. And one of the first things that I always do is that there's a thing called the agreement framework. So the agreement framework is that notion that I can get somebody to agree with statements that I make. So if I think about, for example, when I have a group of people together for a workshop, then I'll ask them 3 questions at the beginning that I know they're going to say yes to. So, the weather's great outside or it's raining, coffee's really great here, isn't it? And aren't these seats in this room really comfortable? Now, those 3 answers are going to be yes. So the second I get somebody saying yes, then their framework and their unconscious driver is to be more willing to be in agreement with me. Now, the next thing, there's lots. One of the key ones that makes a big difference about how somebody feels in relationship to you or to me is that they feel heard. Now, this is spoken about an awful lot in emotional intelligence, which we'll talk about in another session as well, which is the notion of, generally speaking, people listen to respond. It's because in conversation, you might be talking about, I don't know, a pizza restaurant you went to recently, and you're telling me all about the pizza restaurant. Now, the natural inclination is then for me to think, I went to an amazing Italian, so then start talking to you about the Italian. Mm-hmm. Now, the challenge with that is that you may not feel completely heard about the pizza restaurant you went to. If you think about that in terms of a business relationship, we need to stop to listen to understand. It may feel counterintuitive in a high-paced business environment, but in terms of building rapport and trust, it's one of the fundamental keystones, if you like, of doing that, because there's nothing more that people love than being listened to. So give them that gift, if you like, of listening to them to understand so you can respond appropriately. That's the first basis.
So basically, shut up when others speak.
Listen to, if you like, so shut up when others speak and listen to them because you want to understand. Not because you want to respond, it's because you want to understand. Because when you understand, then you can give an appropriate response based on what they've given to you. Now, part of this is when you're listening to somebody, it's about really tuning into their tone of voice and their pace of voice. Now, for me, it's taken me a long time, and it's a struggle sometimes still, to slow down to a pace where somebody's communicating with me at a different pace to what I would naturally communicate. When we tune into that, when we really tune in to the pace that somebody speaks at, we can match it. And in matching it, there is that unconscious driver which makes them feel that sameness that you described at the beginning. So the more building blocks that we can have about sameness, the deeper rapport and trust gets built quicker. So it's the pace of voice and also the tone of voice. I'm not suggesting for a second that you have to match it precisely, but it's about having that flexibility in your communication enough that you can take responsibility to want to match the pace and tone of voice of the other person, because they're going to feel safer with that. It's just going to resonate with them better. They'll be able to understand better. So that's the first area that you can really focus in on. Notice the tone and notice the pace of voice. One of the... You got to say again, Heidi?
What about accents?
No, absolutely not.
No?
I think that if I was to start to, you speak great English, but if I was to start to even attempt an English-Swedish accent when I'm talking to you, you would think I'm a complete lunatic, and I'd be discredited instantly. So that was never, in my experience, and I've been doing this a long time now, never has mimicking somebody's accent even crossed my mind. It's a really interesting question you've asked, which is why I'm laughing at it. No, because it's not going to be authentic. It's just not authentic.
So it's about getting into the same, and by mimicking or mirroring the other one, you'd get into the other person's environment or reality, if you'd like,
exactly.
Reading at the same tempo, for instance. Understanding what they feel. Okay.
Exactly right. So if you think about it, it's interesting you jumped onto breathing at the same tempo. There are so many different facets. There's some simpler ones to think about before we move into breathing and blinking and skin tonality, etc. So the first one that I would encourage people to think about is notice the other person's body language. You can do this in person, and you can absolutely do it on a video call, same as we are today. Now, you and I know each other very well, so we have a deep rapport, so it's very easy for us to be able to communicate. If you think about when you're in face-to-face communication with somebody, it is about noticing how they're standing. So if they're standing with one hip dipped slightly, then it's perfectly reasonable for you to slightly dip your hip as well. If you're seated and they have their legs crossed, cross your legs. If they're sitting there with their hands on their laps, put your hands on their lap. All of this is an unconscious message to the other person that you're in contact with them. What are you laughing at?
I heard put your hand on their lap.
I wouldn't advise that, but put your hands on your lap. So therefore, you are mirroring precisely what they're doing, but in a very casual and natural way. It's important that it's really important that you make this as authentic for yourself as you can based on what the other person is giving you. And the more that you practice doing this in a safe environment, I always say to people coming on training courses, the best way to start practicing this is with people that you really know, and start to notice it more and more, how naturally you start to flow and copy each other and just start to mirror each other. For people that you're in a situation that they're either new to you, so we'll have another session on influencing later on. So this is a really powerful tool for influencing. The more that you can build that rapport at the beginning using these simple techniques, the stronger the influence you're going to have over them, because you are in unconscious rapport with them.
I read this book once on the very, very, very topic, not knowing the person at all, going back to the restaurant that you were talking about at the beginning. So the author of this book, he goes to this restaurant and he noticing there is another guy at the table drinking coffee. And yes, so every time he lifts his cup to drink, he does the same. Every time, very smooth. The other one doesn't notice. Unconsciously, yes, because in the end, our author he breaks the trend. He starts drinking by himself, as in he takes commando of the drinking process, and the other one follows.
Yes. That you just beautifully described. And I remember doing my practitioner training and that being part of the homework, and I had to go and do that in a coffee shop, and it was the most peculiar feeling doing it myself. But the outcome was extraordinary, because what you're describing is the process of pacing and leading. So pacing is precisely what you just said, taking a sip of your coffee at the same time as somebody else down the other end of the bar, another part of the coffee shop, and following their pace. So you are following their pace. So by doing that, unconsciously, because out of peripheral vision or whatever it may be, there will be an unconscious connection made with that person. Over time, and it takes practice to understand at what point you can start to think about leading them. Now, the leading part of what you described is when you get into that unconscious rapport, then you can start to drink your coffee and they will follow you. If you take that example of the coffee shop and think about it in a leadership position, in a one-to-one situation or in a group situation, and you start to pace what's going on. So you start to pace what's happening with every person that comes into the room. You pace the energy of the room. You pace the tonality and the pace of each person that you speak with and interact with. And then you've done that for long enough. And it does take practice to understand. And sometimes you can get it wrong. I still get it wrong sometimes. You then have to say, if you start to lead and they don't follow, you need to slip back into that pacing mode again. And the more you pace and the more you pace, that's when you start to slip into unconscious, and then you can start to lead. In terms of trust, which is what we're talking about today, that's when you can start to really recognize that you've started to build that trust, because there's that unconscious mirroring of what's going on. Now, a moment ago, you spoke about breathing. This is all about what we call sensory acuity. To pace somebody's breathing can be a real challenge, but it is the most deeply unconscious thing that we all do, whether we're awake or we're asleep. So if we can start to really notice the rise and fall of somebody's chest or their stomach, then you can start to do the same thing for yourself in order to be able to pace them. And then you can start that. You're not going to leave somebody in breathing. You could, but the reality is that it's such an unconscious process that it's good enough to start to build that rapport. Same with blinking. Now, this is a real fine detail of somebody that really understands the power of mirroring body language. It's really quite straightforward once you're focused to be able to mirror when the other blinks. Again, it's a completely unconscious process that happens for them. It's part of the autonomic system. It's just what we have to do. So if you're able to start to mirror those things that we just have to do, that's when the real strength of building rapport happens. And you could very easily use those two approaches, breathing and blinking, and you wouldn't need to worry about body language. So if you take that into a Zoom situation, for example, then you can see when the other person is blinking. Breathing is more obvious more oftentimes than not. So you're able to look at blinking and breathing and therefore start to mirror those even over a Zoom call. And that's when you start to really build strong trust and strong rapport. They're tools and techniques that take time and practice to want to develop. And the best analogy with anything, I always think about, if you drive a car, chances are when you first got in a car, you have to think about putting the key in, you have to make sure it was in neutral or in neutral. You had to check the mirror, you thought to put your seatbelt on, you check the wing mirrors, and then you hold the steering wheel, and then you put it into gear. All of these things you had to think about. All learning goes through a process of being consciously incompetent, consciously competent, and then you become unconsciously competent. It's when you get to this phase, so if any of the listeners do drive a car, you just jump in your car and you turn the key and you go off now. You are unconsciously competent at doing that thing. It's the same with these techniques. The more consciously aware you become of your incompetence, then you start to train and program yourself to become unconsciously competent. And once you reach that stage, that's when you just start deploying these things time and time again. I remind myself sometimes to be more consciously aware of what it is I'm doing. 99% of the time I'm not, because it's just ingrained now. I give myself permission, if you like, to be consciously aware of what I'm doing, especially in a scenario when there's new people, because I know that I want to build rapport with these people. Therefore, we have a much better communication and we get much better outcomes.
Whoa. Okay. So, is that your list?
The reality with these podcasts is that it's such, NLP is such a detailed subject that we could go on and on and on, and it's so broad and the application is so broad. But the idea, I think, of these, Heidi, is it's about a bite size. It's about an introduction into what's possible. And I think in terms of listeners being able to take away some tools and techniques that they could practice, I think that list is pretty broad, actually, because it needs to be broken down into each of those parts that we've spoken about, whether it's the agreement framework, getting an answer of yes 3 times, tone of voice and pace of voice. That's a really big one and a big challenge to focus in on. Mirroring of body language it's an art. It's something that you really need to want to be able to do. Everybody at the beginning feels uncomfortable, especially when you're doing it in a safe space. I would strongly recommend you do it with family, notice with family and friends, because it's a safe environment for you to practice it. And if you do start to consciously start following and mirroring their body language, they will say, what the hell are you doing? Because it will be really blindingly obvious, but it's okay because it's a safe space to practice in. And then when it comes down to pacing and leading, that's something that can happen once you've really understood about the tools that we've spoken about, how you deploy them in a natural and authentic way, and therefore then being able to take control, if you will, or start to lead what's going on within that communication. It's amazing. They are intrinsically hugely complex, but in reality, they are unbelievably simple once you've mastered the art of doing them. And the benefits in terms of business are enormous. It doesn't matter whether you're the CEO or if you're a team member. So if you've got a team leader and then you're a team member, if you're able to apply these, the difference in terms of how you relate to the other, and therefore start to get a different level of understanding about how you relate to yourself, can be quite profound. For me, it was the first NLP training I went to, gosh, it's 16, 17 years ago, I think now. It was like somebody had flung the door open to me on how people are. And that was post-training as a psychotherapist. And it was a whole different level of understanding. And then doing the master training and then training as an NLP trainer, it's just incredible. And there's so much more research going on all the time. So there's always new things to learn. So these are the bite sizes that I think, and I hope that people will choose to go away and put into practice.
So you've basically been mentioning shortcuts to how to act as you do when you're with your best friends, when you're with new friends or strangers. So I have this friend, I'm thinking of a specific friend now. People wonder if we are kind of the same person, but by the way we talk and by the way we move and almost laugh. So shortcuts. Thank you, Kelly. See you in the next episode.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Heidi.